I have just started the recording of this open meeting in compliance with CMS. For the record, prior to doing so, I announced that Palmetto GBA would make an audio recording of the open meeting and consented on behalf of Palmetto GBA. I would also ask that all participants please keep their phones and mics on mute until they are actually speaking. The objective of the open meeting is to provide an open venue for stakeholders and interested parties to comment on a proposed LCD. The presentations are summaries of the comments and due to time constraints may not be comprehensive of all concerns. Presenters are asked to submit written comments and any supporting published peer-reviewed literature by June 8th, 2024 to a.policy@palmettogba.com, which will be addressed in detail in the response to comment article. Presenters have 15 minutes and at the conclusion of that time will be muted and the next presenter promoted. Please be mindful of your allotted time frame to ensure you can share your closing remarks before your time concludes. Key points to consider for this presentation is that the FDA classification or granting of a code is not sufficient to meet the criteria for reasonable and necessary. The proposed policy is based on evidence and does not utilize FDA regulatory pathways for coverage determinations. While the policy does limit frequency to 4 applications and 12 weeks duration per episode of care, there is a clear pathway for use of additional applications or time when medical necessity to ensure beneficiaries have access to care for complex and difficult wounds as communicated by stakeholders in the prior listening sessions. The policy is limited to diabetic foot ulcers and venous leg ulcers. Any use outside of these indications is at individual MAC discretion. Finally, the policy intentionally does not limit consideration for coverage to specific study designs, but focuses on sound methodology, which allows investigators multiple options for future investigations while ensuring quality evidence is considered. Again, I'm hearing background noise, so I ask that if you're not getting ready to speak or actively speaking, please mute your microphone. With that being said, I'm going to now turn it over to the first presenter, and the first presenter would be Dr. Gunnar Johansson from Kerecis LLC. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank everyone at Palmetto for the opportunity to speak today. We would just want to start with welcoming the focus on the evidence-based medicine from Palmetto and thanking for the clear criteria of evidence that make sure our patient gets the best possible treatment. The main topics I will be hitting today is the omission of a critical study, the Lantis 2023 data from the literature search, and just about the consistency in evidence review and seeking the inclusion of the Kerecis products in the final rule. Next slide, please. The conflict of interest. I am a salaried employee of Kerecis and have no other financial interest to disclose. A quick introduction of Kerecis. Kerecis is an Icelandic privately held company by Coloplast. We're a FDA 510(k) product that is animal-derived, a biologic product. We're an intact fish skin graft, and we're the first fish skin substitute worldwide from intact fish skin. And we have 2 products that are the subject of this LCD, that is the Q4158 Merigen products and the A2019 Merigen Shield products. These are both intact fish skin products, but have different application procedures and covering materials and pricing structure that makes them different in coding, but the mechanism of action remains the same. What we want to focus on is the Lantis 2023 study. And in the data reviewed by the MACs, they did the included studies that were a little bit older. They had the Lulov 2021 study that was an interim result of a larger diabetic foot ulcer study that had just 49 patients. The review identified correctly that it had limitations due to missing outcome dates, small sample size, and short follow-up period, but that was an interim study, so it didn't have the full data set. It also had the Kersner 2019 study that was on acute wounds, but the critical data not reviewed was the Lantis 2023 study that was on 102 patients. It was on diabetic foot ulcers, and it fulfills all the clinical evidence criteria and the search criteria. It is the full study publication with the full outcome data. It has a larger sample size and long-term follow-up, and that is going to be the key part of our presentation. And we believe that this both shows the reasonableness and the necessary criteria set forth by the MACs to fulfill these standards. And to go into details of the Lantis 23 study, this is a peer-reviewed publication with a PubMed ID. It has a randomized controlled trial design comparing the fish skin graft to standard of care in diabetic foot ulcer patients. It has a larger sample size of 102 patients. Of note that the average size in the covered products is only 72 patients, and it's a multi-center design. It is a well-defined and clinically relevant inclusion-exclusion criteria. It has the appropriate standard of care comparator. It has the rigorous statistical analysis with both intent to treat and per protocol population, has robust randomized controlled design with adequate power. It is independent blinded adjudication of healing outcomes. It has 12-week outcomes, and notably, it has the 12-month follow-up data for patients, which was noted in the LCD that was a lack in many of the studies. It has clinically meaningful and statistically significant improvements in healing outcomes. It has reasonable safety profile with no product-related serious adverse events. And it is a recent publication. It was published last year compared to many of the data that is more than decades old. There are some limitations. Of course, this study was industry funded. There are no real mechanism, as was mentioned in the meeting earlier today, for funding these studies from outside funding. But we believe the rigorous study design tackles that. And this study was conducted during the COVID-19 epidemic, so there was some loss to follow up, but by using intent to treat analysis and last observation carried forward, we believe that is adequately imputed. So to go over the criteria as they are set forward in the LCD, there's 3 requirements mentioned. It is the product characteristic qualifier, the clinical evidence qualifier, and the product form qualifier. And we believe that the Kerecis products fulfill all of these 3 characteristics. And we also kind of comment or question the first product characteristic qualifier and how that was applied or evaluated in general during the review, since there are many products that do not seem to fulfill this by their own accord. So it would be nice to hear clarifications of that. But on the clinical evidence qualifier, while broadly described here, we believe that Kerecis fulfills all these criteria, and especially when we compare it to what products have been put on the covered list. We did a selection of a few of the studies. All of these studies have great evidence, but we just wanted to highlight how the Lantis 2023 study compared to this. We show that the product fulfills the product characteristics criteria. It has a larger size than many of the studies in the list. It has a low risk of bias, and it shows statistically superior results compared to the standard of care. So showing both that it has reasonableness by the statistically significant results and necessary by the clinical rigor of the study design. So the key request we have is for review of this study and hopeful inclusion of the Kerecis devices. And the impact of all of this, and I think during all these public meetings, as we hear about the criteria from the clinicians and from the manufacturers and from the medical directors of the MACs, the focus here is definitely on the Medicare beneficiary and how do we make sure that they are getting something that is beneficial, necessary, and safe. And at Kerecis, like, our commitment to patient safety and rigorous clinical research is at the core of everything we do. Our company was founded on the principle of developing innovative and evidence-based solutions to these complex wound care challenges. And I, as a clinician, and probably many of the clinicians or all of the clinicians here, they've seen firsthand the devastating impact that failed treatments can have on patients with chronic wounds, and the hope that it brings to patients to finally see improvements in their wounds after starting treatment with a product like Kerecis. The physical, emotional, and financial toll of living with a non-healing wound cannot be overstated, and that's why we work tirelessly to develop products like Kerecis and to show their efficacy. And we know the MACs put their concerns about the Medicare beneficiaries first, and that they only get the safest and most well-studied treatments. And that's why, like, we think about our friends, family members, or ourselves in the future, that we would not want them to get products that have no evidence behind them. So we understand the concerns of the administrators, and we want to assure the MACs with our data that when you include Keros' products in the LCD, that you can have confidence that you're providing your beneficiaries with a treatment option that has been thoroughly vetted and proven to be both safe and effective. And part of this, just take a broader scope than the clinical evidence, is not just the studies, but Keros is an FDA-cleared product derived from intact fish skin. And by going through that, it was the first fish skin-derived product. So not only have we gone through the rigor of the animal trials for safety, but we have to go above and beyond that. And probably more than most other products in this space, except for the PMA products. We've been thoroughly tested in humans before receiving our 510(k) clearance, not just animals, for autoimmunicity, molecular mimicry, and seroconvergence, and that's cited in our published studies. And this level of safety testing is a testament to the unwavering commitment to patient well-being. And furthermore, our products are marketed globally, and we receive approval from stringent regulatory bodies around the world, including the European Union, Korea, and others. And these regulatory agencies independently audit our manufacturing facilities every other year and thoroughly review our claims and data. So this level of international scrutiny brings an additional check and balance on our devices, further underscoring our dedication to the patient safety. And in a market where some players might lack even basic research to support their products, Keros stands out as a company that has consistently prioritized patient safety and evidence-based medicine. And we believe that every patient deserves access to the highest quality wound care treatments. And we're committed to being a trusted partner in delivering those treatments to Medicare beneficiaries. And we're excited to announce that not only do we have this was this Lantis 2023 study published, but we will be submitting also in the public comment period a manuscript that's been submitted for publication that is the largest RCT on deep complex diabetic foot ulcer that extend to bone, joint, or tendon as part of our written comments. And this study that was done on 255 patients showed that the Keros device was significantly faster and healed more patients in 16 weeks than the standard of care. And we believe that this robust evidence could provide the MACs with the necessary data to expand not only the covered products, but also the covered indications to include more complex diabetic foot ulcers and further highlighting the broad utility and effectiveness of our products. So in final, we just thank the MACs and the cohort of MACs for the very transparent process and the opportunity to give feedback. And thank you for considering the human impact of the decision and your commitment to ensuring the safety and well-being of the patients you serve. And we urge you to consider the Keros evidence in your final LCD. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So the next speaker will be Pinto, King, and Spalding.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you very much to Palmetto for the opportunity to present today. My name is Priya Narona Pinto. I'm a partner at King and Spalding, and I represent the Medicare Access to Skin Substitutes Coalition. The MASS Coalition is a group of skin substitute companies that are dedicated to ensuring access to critical wound care products. And we are seriously concerned about the coverage policy set forth by the MAC in this draft LCD. We believe that it's arbitrary and capricious, it sets unclear standards, it's inconsistent with the FDA regulatory framework for skin substitute products, and finally, it's bad for patient care. Next slide, please. First, it's important to recognize that CGS, Novitas, and First Coast MACs issued very similar final LCDs in the summer of 2023. After the MASS Coalition and other stakeholders voiced their concerns with the policy in those final LCDs to both the MACs and to CMS, The MACs rescinded those final LCDs before they became effective. Here, not only did this MAC issue a draft LCD very similar to the ones that were rescinded, but all of the MACs throughout the country followed suit, effectively issuing a national coverage policy. But even after rescinding the final LCDs last year, the MACs did not obtain stakeholder input with regard to these new draft LCDs. There was no contractor advisory committee meetings, no other public meetings to obtain input on how to formulate a policy that works for the benefit of Medicare patients with chronic wounds. Instead, we have the same substantive policy that was rescinded last year, although it's packaged a little bit differently. The MAS Coalition products are HCTPs, human cell and tissue-based products, under Section 361 of the Public Health Service Act. And it's important to note that FDA would not consider HCTPs for amniotic or placental tissue products to be indicated for any purpose other than serving as a wound cover or barrier. FDA would not consider an HCTP to be appropriately described as functioning like a skin scaffold. But this draft LCD adopts a definition of skin substitute that requires the product to be, quote, a scaffolding for skin growth. And this requirement is inconsistent with how FDA views HCTPs. Again, the FDA TRG, Tissue Reference Group, would not issue a letter stating that an HCTP should function like a skin scaffold. Also, the MAC cites the AMA codebook, but there's no clear rationale in the draft LCD regarding why the skin scaffold definition in the CPT codebook is relevant to a Medicare coverage determination. The draft LCD proposes coverage for only 15 skin substitute products and puts over 200 products in the non-covered category. And the reason why a product was put into a particular category is unclear. The proposed standard for clinical data is not clearly defined. The skin scaffolding requirement is also not clearly defined. And the distinction between covered and non-covered products is also arbitrary and capricious. For example, there are products in the covered category that arguably provide scaffolding for skin growth and others that do not. Regarding the 4 application utilization limitation, this was widely challenged in the final LCDs that were rescinded last year. Yet for some reason, the MACs have proposed it again. Clinical experience shows that most large and complex wounds require more than 4 applications to completely heal. And there is clinical data that is relied upon by the MACs to support coverage for certain products that used more than 4 applications to heal wounds. In fact, the authors of the primary study relied upon by the MACs to support the 4 application limit have stated that the MACs misinterpret those studies. And if this draft LCD is finalized as proposed, Medicare beneficiaries will suffer. It's unreasonable to expect that only 15 products, and all of those 15 products are not necessarily currently marketed today, but that those remaining products can serve the entire Medicare population. Treatment of wounds will be delayed if treated at all. And Medicare beneficiaries in vulnerable populations, rural, underserved, minority populations, will be disproportionately affected. And although the draft LCD technically only applies to skin substitutes for diabetic foot ulcers and venous leg ulcers, at least one MAC has stated that skin substitutes for other wounds, specifically pressure ulcers, will be treated like dressings for purposes of reimbursement. This would completely devastate access to proven treatments for patients suffering from painful chronic wounds. In summary, we believe that the draft LCD is legally defective and bad policy. The MAC should not finalize the draft LCD. Instead, the MAC should take steps to obtain input from a wide variety of stakeholders before proceeding with a new coverage policy. Unlike this draft LCD, the new coverage policy should be well-reasoned, based on established data and clinical experience. It should establish clear and attainable parameters for coverage that are consistent with the FDA regulatory framework, and it should promote effective wound care for Medicare beneficiaries. Thank you for your time this afternoon.
Is Karen Ravitz from the Coalition of Wound Stakeholders available?
I am. So thank you so much for holding this hearing today. My name is Karen Ravitz. I'm the Health Policy Advisor for the Coalition of Wound Care Manufacturers. Founded in 2000, the coalition represents leading manufacturers of wound care products used by Medicare and commercially insured beneficiaries for the treatment of wounds, including cellular and/or tissue-based products for skin wounds, or CTPs. that are the subject of this policy. In previous hearings, we've had to announce disclosures, but I have no conflicts of interest, so I figured I would just say that here as well. Once again, thank you for the opportunity to provide our feedback on the proposed LCD and accompanying LCA. The coalition appreciates that the MAC has adopted many of the changes recommended by the coalition in our previously submitted comments, including but certainly not limited to the ability for patients to obtain additional applications when medically necessary and documented. There are many areas in which we believe clarification is necessary in this draft policy, but we'll provide those issues as well as more substantive comments on other provisions contained in this draft policy when we submit our written comments. But for the hearing today, I'd like to focus on 3 issues. First, we fully support the evidence-based policy that has been provided by Palmetto, but we do believe that clarity is needed to better understand the evidentiary bar. For example, while it appears that the MACs are only providing coverage for products with RCT studies, there are several products that have RCT studies that are not covered. It also appears that the only RCT studies that the MAC is accepting is for products that have applications within the policy parameters. The MAC has also indicated that coverage will be provided for CTPs having peer-reviewed published evidence, and yet there are products that have peer-reviewed evidence that are also not covered. So there's really no consistency in the evidence that's being accepted by the MACs, nor is there transparency as to what metrics are being utilized when reviewing the evidence. While the MACs have identified grade as the methodology utilized to review the evidence, there are outputs based on the grade methodology that are missing. These outputs should have been placed in the document, which would have helped inform stakeholders as to why certain studies were not accepted. Yet these outputs were not included in the LCD or LCA. As such, we would request the MAC be more transparent in its criteria for product coverage and publish what is considered an adequate trial design and outcome to gain coverage, as well as the outputs from the evidence reviewed based on the grade methodology. We would also like to know when the MAC reviewed evidence for this policy, what was the cutoff date, as there are recent studies that do not seem to be included in the evidentiary review for this draft policy, and I'm sure those manufacturers will be submitting that in their written comments as well. We would also like to better understand the time frame and process a manufacturer will need to undertake when submitting evidence for consideration. Does the manufacturer need to submit a reconsideration request in order for the MAC to review evidence for consideration of being placed on the Group 2 list? Or, since changes can usually be made to an LCA without going through the notice and comment period and completely reopening the entire LCD, which is actually why the LCAs were established in the first place, that a manufacturer can simply submit their evidence for consideration and the MAC will review and place the product on the Group 2 covered list if the MAC deems the evidence to be satisfactory without going through the notice and comment period. If the latter, how long will it take for Palmetto to review and make a decision for inclusion? Will the decision include the rationale for either placing or not placing the product on the Group 2 covered list? We raise this issue as in previous drafts, we've been told inconsistent messages and would appreciate clarity being provided. The coalition recommends that the MACs follow the intention of the creation of the LCAs and allow for a manufacturer to submit studies for review without having to reopen the entire LCD for notice and comment, as well as for manufacturers who are new to the market to be able to be included for coverage in this policy. I would like to also raise a couple of points that have been made in previous open meetings that the coalition supports. We support a comment that was made by Dr. Serena in previous open hearings that if a manufacturer is conducting clinical trials and is registered on clinicaltrials.gov, there should be provisional coverage for those products. We also support a comment in which we believe that the final LCD should provide timely review of products requesting coverage, and that was made by multiple presenters. We would also like to ensure that there is adequate implementation timeframes that have been addressed by multiple presenters as well. And finally, we would like to ensure that all of the 15 codes and corresponding products listed in the Group 2 covered product list are available for coverage and reimbursement for both DFUs and VLUs. As mentioned, the coalition will be submitting written comments with additional issues being addressed, and we appreciate the opportunity to speak today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Marcia Nusgard from Alliance of Wound Care Stakeholders, are you available?
I certainly am. Thank you so much. We appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak today. And you do see my written oral testimony on the screen, so you might be able to follow along with me. But Melissa, thank you so much for all your help today, too. My name is Marcia Nusgard. I don't have any conflict of interest. I am the CEO of the Alliance of Wound Care Stakeholders, so we appreciate the opportunity to provide the Alliance's concerns regarding the release of the skin substitute CTP LCD and the company LCA. The Alliance is a nonprofit multidisciplinary trade association of physician medical specialty societies and clinical associations whose mission is to promote quality care and access to products and services for people with wounds through effective advocacy and educational outreach in the regulatory, legislative, and public arenas. This oral statement was written with the advice of the Alliance clinical specialty societies and organizations that not only possess expert knowledge in complex chronic wounds, but also in wound care research. The Alliance has several concerns with the current draft and the areas we identified, which need further clarification, and we will address those in our written comments. However, today I'd like to address just 3 issues. First, the proposed policy continues to permit only 4 applications of CTPs in a 12-week period of time. As opposed to the previous drafts, Palmetto is permitting additional applications and an extension of the 12-week period of time when medically necessary and documented in the patient file. The Alliance fully supports the proposed LCD language permitting additional applications or an extension of the 12-week period of time based on medical necessity with documentation provided in the patient's medical record. It's important that the patient be able to receive more applications when medically necessary, especially when their wounds are progressing. So the Alliance appreciates and supports this clinically necessary and appropriate change from previous drafts. Secondly, the Alliance also supports coverage based on evidence. We've always been on the record supporting evidence-based medicine. However, we're concerned that Palmetto eliminated coverage for a significant majority of products in the market currently. Many have evidence to support their use. As such, we believe that Palmetto needs to be clearer as to the evidentiary bar, as we believe that there are studies for products that were eliminated from coverage that should not have been. We're also aware of products that have evidence that were not identified in your list of products evidence that were reviewed. So what is the process for a manufacturer to submit evidence that doesn't appear to have been reviewed? More information on the evidentiary bar and any recourse that a manufacturer has with respect to evidence review should be provided. Finally, we also would like to urge Palmetto that once this policy becomes finalized, given the limitation on the number of products that are currently on the proposed list of covered products, that there be ample time to implement this policy. Patients will be in the midst of treatment plans on products that may not be covered any longer. The treatment plans are 12 weeks, and any changes to those treatment plans can negatively impact them. Furthermore, facilities who do not use products on the proposed list of covered products will need to go through a formulary review process of the products that are covered to determine what they should add to their formulary. The process can take upwards of 8 months. As such, we would encourage Palmetto to ensure that there is enough time to implement the provisions of the LCD once finalized so to not negatively impact patient care. We appreciate the opportunity to be able to comment today, and we will certainly submit our written comments within by June the 8th. Thank you so much again.
Thank you very much. Let's go to Dr. Tabor from Biologics. Are you available?
Yes, sir. I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, you can go ahead with your presentation.
Good afternoon, Palmetto LCD Review Board. On behalf of Axolotl Biologics, thank you for allowing our organization to present and express concerns regarding the draft skin substitute grafts, CTPs, for the treatment of diabetic foot ulcers and venous leg ulcers. Next slide, please. In today's presentation, I will go through a brief overview of the axolotl allografts, current and future research and clinical publications, and our polite considerations for the Palmetto LCD group and additional MAC regions. First, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Dr. Aaron Tabor, and I am the Chief Science Officer for Axolotl Biologics, serving in the translational field for over 17 years. Please be advised, I am a paid full-time employee of Axolotl Biologics, leading its clinical and scientific research divisions. Currently, Axolotl has 2 commercial CTPs coming in 9 different size offerings. The first is a single-layer amniotic allograft, and the second product is a bilayer or dual-layer amniotic allograft. These products are minimally manipulated and processed in an AATB-accredited facility located in Phoenix, Arizona. They have a 5-year shelf life under ambient storage conditions, and we have engaged with the Executive Secretary of the FDA's Tissue Reference Group, receiving a favorable TRG recommended response on these allografts. As such, these products are marketed solely under Section 361 of the PHS Act and regulated solely under 21 CFR 1271, acting as a wound covering and structural barrier. It is important to note that axolotl CTPs are intended to remain on the wound bed of the recipient and have demonstrated positive clinical outcomes in many peer-reviewed clinical literatures that were not noted in the draft LCDs. Currently, these allografts have been used by clinicians and physicians in 44 different states and have been reimbursed by over 125 payers, serving thousands to tens of thousands of patients. The research image on the left is demonstrating biocompatibility with respect to cellular adherence, and in this scanning electron micrograph, you can see dermal fibroblasts attaching and proliferating 12 hours after being added or seeded onto the allograft scaffold. During our review of the draft LCDs, it was noted that Axolotl Biologics did not have clinical literature. As demonstrated on this slide, we have published in many peer-reviewed journals from 2022 to current, and we have additional research and clinical work that is ongoing. This includes a full characterization of the axolotl allografts to include both mechanical and biological properties of our allografts. Additionally, even prior to the LCD draft publication, Axolotl Biologics has intended to begin a prospective multi-site clinical study on diabetic foot ulcers or venous leg ulcers using the Axolotl Biologics allografts as tissue-based wound coverings. This slide captures a segment of the proposed LCD where the LCD reads, to qualify as a substitute graft CTP, the product must be in non-autologous human cellular or tissue product. Examples include dermal, epidermal, cellular, acellular homograft, or allograft. Axolotl allograft CTPs do fit this description. Furthermore, the LCD states, the products are applied as a sheet, allowing the scaffolding for skin growth, and it's intended to remain on the recipient and grow in place or allow recipient cells to grow into the implanted graft material, and have quality supporting evidence to demonstrate the product's safety, effectiveness, and positive clinical outcomes in the function as a graft for DFU and/or VLU. Axolotl Biologics does currently have clinical literature supporting its safety and effectiveness, demonstrating positive clinical outcomes being used in patients, as demonstrated in the previous slide. Furthermore, Axolotl Biologics has scheduled randomized clinical studies to begin launch specifically for diabetic foot ulcers or venous leg ulcers this year. And lastly, the LCD states, liquid or gel preparations are not considered grafts. Their fluidity does not allow graft placement and stabilization of the product on the wound. As we have demonstrated in this presentation, axolotl allografts are not liquid or aqueous solutions, nor are they gelatinous in nature. Therefore, this would not be applicable. To summarize, Axolotl Biologics products are membrane allografts applied as a sheet that are intended to remain on the recipient and allow recipient's cells to grow into the implanted material. Secondly, we have satisfied all necessary regulatory requirements issued by the FDA as evidenced by our favorable TRG response. Thirdly, We have multiple peer-reviewed publications that demonstrated our product safety and clinical efficacy. And lastly, Axolotl Biologics supports the desire for CMS and its subsequent MAC regions to have manufacturers of skin substitute products demonstrate the clinical benefits to patients. As such, Axolotl Biologics politely requests the Palmetto LCD Review Board and all other MAC review boards for the following. First, we ask for the MACs and broader CMS to establish clear guidelines and parameters of what clinical benchmarks are needed to be considered a covered product. Second, we ask for the MACs and broader CMS to use a similar approach to how the FDA handled the re-regulation of birth tissue injectable products and provide a realistic time frame to complete and publish the randomized control trial that fits these clear guidelines and parameters. Third, we ask for the MACs and broader CMS to establish a way for the manufacturers and others to ask confidential and/or clarifying questions similar to the FDA reviewers to ensure that our investments in such trials and documentation are in alignment with the LCDs. With that, we thank you for the opportunity to present, and we look forward to our comment packet submission by the June deadline. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Our next presenter is back on, I believe, Dr. Sheriff.
He just had to step back into the OR. He'll be back in 45 minutes. If we miss it, it's our apologies.
Yeah, I don't believe, is there someone that can present on behalf of Dr. Sheriff?
That's okay. We'll go ahead and we'll just put through the written comments. I appreciate the opportunity and the flexibility. I'm sorry this one didn't work out.
Thank you. I believe, Melissa, is that all? I don't see any other speakers. You said BioStem Technologies had to pull out. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so then I guess we're done with all our speakers then at this point. Thank you, everybody, for attending this opening meeting. Without any further comments, we'll go ahead and conclude.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.